The silence in that room was so absolute I could hear the grandfather clock ticking in the hallway, each second marking time I'd never get back. 23 family members packed into that stuffy law office, all of them holding their breath, waiting to hear how much of my grandfather's fortune they'd walk away with. My cousins were practically salivating. My aunts had already planned their renovations. My uncles were texting their financial advisors under the table. And me. I was sitting in the back corner near the door, exactly where I'd always been placed in this family. The forgotten daughter, the one who didn't matter, the one they'd written off years ago. Then the attorney adjusted his glasses, cleared his throat, and looked directly at me for the first time in the entire proceedings. His voice carried across that room like a thunderclap, and the words that came out of his mouth changed everything. "We'll begin with the primary beneficiary, Miss Billionaire Vance. Before we continue, if you enjoy emotional family dramas, hidden truths, and unforgettable endings, subscribe to Life Tangle Secrets. Every story here reminds us that the truth always finds its way into the light." Let me take you back to the beginning. Not the dramatic beginning, but the quiet one. The one where I was just a little girl with pigtails and scraped knees, desperate for my family's approval and never quite able to earn it. I was born Billionaire Grace Vance, the youngest of 3 children and the only daughter. My mother used to say I came out looking confused, like I'd been expecting a warmer welcome. She wasn't wrong. From the moment I took my first breath, I was the odd one out. My brothers were golden. They got the best rooms, the best schools, the best of everything. I got hand-me-downs and half-hearted hugs. My father was a successful surgeon, the kind of man who measured worth in achievements and bank balances. My mother was a socialite who measured worth in appearances and connections. Neither of them had much use for a quiet, bookish daughter who preferred reading in the garden to attending their fancy dinner parties. I learned early that I was invisible in their world. Not hated exactly, just irrelevant. Like a piece of furniture that no one remembered buying, but no one bothered to throw out either. My grandfather, though, was different. Arthur Vance was the patriarch of our family, a self-made billionaire who'd built a shipping empire from nothing. He was stern and demanding, but he saw things other people missed. He saw me. I remember spending summers at his estate, trailing behind him through the gardens while he explained how to prune roses and why integrity mattered more than money. He'd look at me with those sharp blue eyes and say, "Billionaire, you've got more backbone than the rest of them combined." Don't you ever forget that. I didn't understand what he meant back then. I just knew that in his presence I felt seen. While my brothers competed for his attention with flashy achievements and expensive gifts, I just sat with him in comfortable silence. I'd bring him tea in the afternoons and listen to his stories about building his company from scratch. He told me about the early days when he had nothing but determination and a dream. He told me about the people who'd betrayed him and the ones who'd stood by him. He told me about my grandmother, the love of his life, who died before I was born. Those conversations were sacred to me. I didn't realize until much later that they were sacred to him, too. The rest of my childhood was a blur of being overlooked. My brothers got cars for their 16th birthdays. I got a card with $20 in it. My brothers were sent to prestigious universities. I was told to find a practical degree that wouldn't be wasted on a woman who'd probably just get married anyway. I chose accounting, not because I loved it, but because it seemed like the safest path to independence. I worked my way through school, waitressing at night and studying during the day, determined to prove that I didn't need their money or their approval to survive. I married my college sweetheart, Thomas, a man who saw me the way my grandfather did. He was kind and steady, the opposite of everything my family valued. They thought he was beneath me, a mechanic with grease under his nails and no family name to speak of. My mother barely spoke to me at the wedding. My father gave a toast that managed to insult both Thomas and me in under 2 minutes, but I didn't care. I'd finally found someone who loved me for who I was, not what I could do for him. We built a small life together, the kind of life that would have made my family cringe. A modest house in a middle-class neighborhood. 2 children that we raised with love instead of expectations. A business we started from our garage, fixing and restoring old furniture. It wasn't glamorous, but it was ours. And for a while, it was enough. I thought I'd made peace with my family's rejection. I thought I'd accepted that I would always be the forgotten daughter. But life has a way of reopening old wounds when you least expect it. The first crack in my carefully constructed piece came when my grandfather fell ill. He was 92 years old, still sharp as a tack but failing physically. I drove 4 hours every weekend to visit him, sitting by his bedside and holding his hand while the rest of the family made excuses about being too busy. My brothers sent flowers. My aunts and uncles made vague promises to visit that never materialized. My parents called once, maybe twice. But I was there. I was always there. In those final months, my grandfather talked more than he ever had. He told me about his regrets, his fears, his hopes for the future. He told me he was proud of me, not for what I'd achieved, but for who I'd become. He said, "Eleanor, they've underestimated you your whole life, but I see you. I've always seen you." I cried in the car on the drive home that night, not because he was dying, but because he was the only person in my entire family who'd ever made me feel worthy. When he passed, the grief was overwhelming, but it was quickly overshadowed by the circus that followed. My family descended on his estate like vultures, picking over his belongings before his body was even cold. My mother called me to demand I come to the reading of the will, not out of love or respect, but because she wanted to make sure I didn't cause any trouble. The irony wasn't lost on me. The forgotten daughter, suddenly important enough to worry about. The day of the will reading arrived, and I walked into that conference room knowing exactly what to expect. I'd be given a token amount, something to appease me, maybe a small trust fund for my children. The bulk of the fortune would go to my brothers and the golden grandchildren who'd spent their lives kissing the ring. I'd already mourned this moment. I'd already accepted that my grandfather's death would be another reminder of my place in the family hierarchy. Or so I thought. The attorney's voice hung in the air like smoke. "We'll begin with the primary beneficiary, Miss Eleanor Vance." I actually looked behind me. There had to be another Eleanor. It was a common enough name. But the attorney was staring directly at me, his expression unreadable. My mother's face had gone pale. My brothers looked like they'd been slapped. My aunts were exchanging furious whispers while my uncles sat in stunned silence. "Eleanor Grace Vance," the attorney repeated, as if he could sense my disbelief. "Your grandfather left specific instructions for you to be the first to receive your inheritance." I stood up on shaky legs, feeling 23 pairs of eyes boring into me. The attorney slid a thick envelope across the table. "I'll need you to open this now. According to your grandfather's wishes, the contents must be read aloud." My hands were trembling so badly I could barely tear the seal. The room was deathly quiet, the kind of silence that feels heavy and suffocating. I pulled out a letter in my grandfather's handwriting and a set of documents that made no sense at first glance. Then I started reading. "To my dearest Eleanor, the one who understands that family isn't about blood, it's about presence. It isn't about inheritance, it's about love. It isn't about what you take, but what you give." I could hear my mother's sharp intake of breath. My brother Matthew started to speak, but the attorney silenced him with a look. "I'm leaving you," I continued, my voice cracking. "The majority ownership of Vance Shipping, my shares, my voting rights, my legacy." The room exploded. My brother James shot to his feet, knocking his chair over. "That's impossible. He was in his right mind, he wouldn't have left it to her. She's nobody. She's nothing." The attorney remained calm. "Your grandfather was of sound mind when he executed this will 6 months ago. He had 2 independent physicians confirm his mental capacity. This document is legally binding." My mother's voice was shrill. "There must be a mistake. She doesn't have the experience. She doesn't have the connections. She's just the little girl who liked to sit in the garden. What does she know about running a business?" But I was still reading, my eyes scanning the next paragraph. "I know my family will question this decision. I know they'll say you're not capable, not qualified, not worthy. But I know the truth. I've watched you your entire life. I've watched you work harder than anyone else for less credit. I've watched you love unconditionally when you received nothing in return. I've watched you build something from nothing, not because you had to, but because you refused to give up." I was crying now, tears streaming down my face while my family screamed around me. But I kept reading. "You have the integrity they lack. You have the backbone they'll never understand. And you have the intelligence they've consistently underestimated. That's why I'm leaving you everything. Because I trust you. And because I've never trusted any of them." The attorney produced another document, a letter from my grandfather's personal investigator. "There's more, Miss Vance. Your grandfather also uncovered some information that he wanted you to have." I took the letter with trembling hands and scanned the contents. It detailed years of embezzlement by my brother Matthew, secret offshore accounts my father had been siphoning from the company, and a network of backroom deals my uncles had made that had nearly bankrupted the shipping division. My grandfather had known. He'd known for years, and he'd been gathering evidence, quietly waiting for the moment when he could expose them all. "I didn't want to believe it," my grandfather's letter continued. "But I had to protect what I built. I had to protect it from the very people who should have honored it. You're the only one I trust to do what's right." The room was chaos. My brothers were shouting accusations. My aunts were crying. My uncles were threatening lawsuits. My mother was desperately trying to salvage the situation, claiming that the evidence was fabricated, that I'd manipulated the will, that I'd been poisoning my grandfather's mind for years. I just stood there, holding those letters and feeling something shift inside me. For 26 years, I'd been the invisible daughter, the forgotten sister, the disposable granddaughter. I'd accepted their rejection as my fate. I'd learned to live in their shadows and make peace with the scraps they threw me. But in that moment, surrounded by their rage and desperation, I realized something that changed everything. They weren't angry because I didn't deserve this. They were angry because I did. I had earned it through years of quiet dedication while they'd been too busy plotting and scheming to notice. I had earned it by being present when no one else was. I had earned it by staying true to myself when the rest of them had sold their integrity for status and money. "Eleanor, say something," Thomas whispered beside me. He'd come to support me, the only person in that room who truly loved me without conditions. I looked around at my family, these people who'd dismissed me my entire life, and I felt something I'd never felt before. Power. Not the kind that comes from wealth or status, but the kind that comes from finally understanding your worth. I turned to the attorney and asked, "What happens next?" "Your grandfather instructed me to give you full control immediately. The transfer of shares is already processed. The board has been notified. You're the majority shareholder, Miss Vance." My brother Matthew lunged toward me, but Thomas stepped in front of him. My father was shouting about disinheriting me as if he had anything left to take. My mother was sobbing, whether from shock or fury I couldn't tell. I looked at them all and felt a strange sense of calm. "You've spent my entire life telling me I didn't matter," I said, my voice steady in a way that surprised even me. "You told me I was forgettable. You told me I was a disappointment. You told me I'd never amount to anything. But the only person whose opinion ever mattered knew the truth. And now you're going to sit there and watch while I do exactly what you said I couldn't." I walked out of that room without looking back. Thomas followed me, his hand on my back, steadying me as I made my way down to the parking garage. I didn't stop shaking until we were in the car, and even then, it took a long time for the tears to stop flowing. The months that followed were the hardest of my life. My family launched every legal challenge they could think of, throwing money at lawyers and spinning lies to anyone who would listen. The media picked up the story, painting me alternately as a villain and a victim. I had to hire security. I had to lock down my social media. I had to explain to my children why their grandparents were saying such terrible things about their mother. But I also had to learn how to run a multinational corporation. I threw myself into it with the same determination I'd used to waitress my way through college, the same dedication I'd brought to building my furniture business, the same grit I'd developed as the forgotten daughter who never gave up. I hired the best advisors. I surrounded myself with people who believed in me. I studied the financials until I could recite them in my sleep. And slowly, painfully, I began to earn the respect I'd never received from my blood relatives. The investigation my grandfather had started uncovered even more. My brother Matthew was charged with embezzlement. My father's secret accounts were frozen. My uncles lost their board positions and their reputations. One by one, the golden children fell, and I watched it happen with a complicated mix of grief and vindication. It wasn't about revenge. I didn't want them to suffer, but I'd spent too many years accepting their judgment of me to let them rewrite history now. They'd made their choices, and they'd created their own consequences. My job was to move forward, to honor my grandfather's trust, to build something better than what they'd tried to destroy. 5 years later, I stood in the same conference room where my life had changed forever. The same attorney sat at the head of the table, but this time, I was the one in charge. We were finalizing the sale of the shipping division, a decision I'd made to streamline the business and focus on more sustainable ventures. My family had been reduced to silent observers, their power stripped away, their influence gone. My mother tried to approach me after the meeting, her face pinched and anxious. "Billionaire, we need to talk. There are things that need to be said." I looked at her, this woman who dismissed me my entire childhood, and felt nothing but a quiet sense of closure. "You had 26 years to talk to me," I said. "You chose silence. Now it's my turn." If you've ever been judged, betrayed, or underestimated by the people who were supposed to love you, let me know in the comments. And if you're enjoying this journey, subscribe to Life Tangle Secrets for more unforgettable stories. I walked away from her that day with the same calm I'd felt in that first moment of revelation. I had a business to run and children to raise. I had a marriage to nurture and a life to build. I'd spent too long letting their opinion of me define my worth. I wasn't about to let them steal another moment of my happiness. My grandfather was right about something else, too. He'd told me once that family isn't always the people you're born with. Sometimes it's the people who choose you, the ones who see you and love you anyway. Thomas was my family. My children were my family. The friends who'd stood by me through the chaos, they were my family. And my grandfather, even in death, was still the truest family I'd ever known. Looking back, I don't think he left me the company because he wanted to punish my relatives. I think he left it to me because he saw something in me that none of them could see. He saw a woman who had been broken and refused to stay broken. He saw a mother who loved without condition. He saw a wife who fought for her marriage. He saw a person who had taken every rejection and turned it into fuel for a better life. The truth is, being the forgotten daughter gave me the greatest gift I could have ever received. It forced me to find my own way. It taught me to trust my own instincts instead of seeking validation from people who would never give it. It showed me that the only approval that matters is the approval you give yourself. If my grandfather were alive today, I know what he'd say. He'd look at me with those sharp blue eyes and nod, that small smile playing at the corners of his mouth. "I told you, Billionaire, I always knew." I think about that day in the conference room often, not with bitterness, but with gratitude. Because in that moment of chaos, when everything was falling apart, I finally understood what my grandfather had been trying to tell me all those years. I was never invisible. I was never forgotten. I was simply waiting for the right moment to be seen. And when that moment came, I was ready. If this story stayed with you, share it with someone who needs to hear it. Subscribe to Life Tangle Secrets for more powerful stories where hidden truths become life-changing lessons. Thank you for listening, and I'll see you in the next story.